Well, for more on the issue which has dominated debate in this week in Parliament, the Canadian mission in Iraq, I'm joined now by three MPs from the different parties. James Bezan is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence. Paul Dewar is the NDP's Foreign Affairs critic. And John McKay is the Liberal MP for Scarborough-Guildwood. James Bezan, let's start with the question that everyone's asking, and that is, what are we going to finally see when the government tables its motion, being told as early as tomorrow? What are we going to finally see in the motion?
Well, I'm not going to preempt the timing or what the motion is going to be made of. I can tell you that we've had some very concrete discussions amongst caucus, that we are very concerned about what's happening in northern Iraq and Syria with ISIL and wanting to make sure that Canada does its part in addressing this terrorist threat. We don't want to see, ethnic minorities, religious minorities, and women victimized and brutalized by this terrorist organization. So we have to do our part. We've been asked to play a bigger role, and that's something that the government is seized with at this moment.
The reason I'm asking, though, is that you might sense there's a palpable frustration that there's been leaks to the media. We've been told that there will be a time frame, there'll be an exit date, or there'll be a limited time frame. We've been told that it'll be CF-18s, and there'll be some two tanker planes. We've been told all of that. And yet today, the House Leader wouldn't even tell us whether it's going to be tabled tomorrow. He said it may or may not be tabled tomorrow. There may or may not be debate on it next week. Wouldn't give the day. Why are we playing games with this?
This is not about playing games. This is a very serious issue.
Right, but why don't we just get straight answers?
Well, because we're not at the point of making those announcements yet. We're not ready to make that decision. Things may change in the next few hours or the next few days. So we have to take every precaution in deciding how we engage on this issue and what we task the Canadian Armed Forces with. This is a serious matter, and unlike the Liberal leader who likes to make jokes about these types of situations, we will be very sober about how we go forward on engaging ISIL and what role that we will play as the Canadian Armed Forces and the Government of Canada.
Okay, Paul Dewar, your leader was asked this yesterday, but people were still asking it again today, and they'll continue to ask it. Where does your party stand on a time-limited CF-18 airstrike role for the Canadian Forces? So time-limited CF airstrikes. Where do you stand on that role for the Canadian Forces in fighting Islamic State extremists in Iraq?
Well, we've said from the beginning we think there's a very clear role for us, and that's to do what we were asked to do in the humanitarian support, helping victims of sexual violence. And I should add, today I asked the question, very simple question, said, I asked Minister Baird if he was going to help with humanitarian support, actually build refugee camps for the people fleeing and who are in need of that, those who have been victims of sexual violence. And what I got back from the government was this kind of ridicule. How dare I ask that question as if that wasn't a priority? Well, it's a priority because there's people who are affected who we need to help. And we don't see that this role the government has carved out, which is, by the way, doesn't instill confidence when they can't answer basic questions like how many troops, what are they doing there in this 30-day period? And then they're leaping into this next combat mission, that we can have confidence in the government on this. So we're not confident in the government's, the way they've laid this out, and we don't have confidence in what the dribs and drabs we're hearing now, and it'll be very hard for us to support any kind of combat mission in the way the government's laying it out. But we do believe we should have been 3 weeks ago, almost a month ago, helping save lives by building refugee camps, helping victims of sexual violence and protecting minorities.
Let me just ask a question.
They refused to do that.
Right, but let me just ask a question.
No, you're not.
We're talking about answering.
You have not. Actually, this is where they're wrong. They have not, and this is a really important point. There was money donated earlier in the summer, but when I asked Minister Baird at committee if there's going to be new funding for building refugee camps that he and I saw the need for, helping with sexual violence, and also going after perpetrators for these horrific crimes and protecting minorities, there's been no new money announced.
Okay, but I want to ask a question, though. I mean, forgetting basic questions, we didn't get a basic answer to the basic question.
No, we can't support this government on going into this combat mission.
So you cannot support a combat mission that would include airstrikes?
They're not interested in protecting those people that are being victimized, terrorized, and brutalized.
That's your party position now?
Yes, but it was yesterday, it is today.
Okay, because it wasn't clear yesterday. Mr. Mulcair did not answer categorically. The NDP will not support air raids, Canadian air raids in Iraq.
As we've been told, and the way the government's put it out, no, we would not.
Okay. To the Liberals, I have to ask John McKay, You've talked about bozo eruptions, and your leader today made a joke about whipping out your CF-18s to show how big they are. A lot's being made of those comments, in addition to a lot of serious comments he made. But he made this sort of off-the-cuff comment. I don't know what he's trying to achieve by talking about pulling out your CF-18s, talking about the Conservative government. Was that appropriate?
Well, you started off by asking James about when's the resolution coming out, what's going to be in the resolution, how long are we committing to, or what are the assets that we're putting in place, et cetera, et cetera. Mr. Trudeau's general position has been, well, it's up to the Prime Minister to actually prove the case that that we need to A, be there, which we have some sympathy for, but B, what it is it that we're actually providing into this conflict. Because bear in mind, this is an extraordinarily complicated area. We're being invited to go down a rat hole where we don't have any history of success, where the Prime Minister's propensity is to keep all the cards to himself and have a little bit of bellicosity to it, and hence this machismo attitude on the part of the Prime Minister leads to some, how should we say, stilted debates and possibly things that shouldn't be said. Nevertheless, we're very concerned about this. It's a very difficult conflict. It's like pick your favorite terrorist. Because, for instance, Turkey has a choice between whether they're going to support or whether they're going to go against ISIS or whether they're going to go against the Kurds and PKK. Iran will be, who have been up until now the worst sponsor of state terrorism, now will be potentially allies, and they support Hezbollah, and Hezbollah, of course, supports Assad. Saudi Arabia is the how should we say, the heartbed or the soul of Wahhabism, and that is the theological underpinnings for ISIL.
Okay,
so
but I mean,
you've got,
in terms of
you've
whether
got
you
an
would
incredible
support,
number of
right,
complications here, where we're not actually being given the goods, and it's very easy to get into these conflicts. It's extraordinarily difficult to get out, and as I say, we have no history of success in this area. So I think Mr. Trudeau's hesitation is entirely appropriate.
What about his glib and childish comments?
But I mean, I guess it does beg the two questions. One, what do you think of Mr. Trudeau's comments, which you didn't answer? And two, is your party ready to support airstrikes on ISIL targets in Iraq?
Well, the second question first, which is show us what the resolution is, show us how this is going to be a successful mission, show us how what are our other alternatives. As to comments made or not made, I think that there's some machismo comments that are made by the Prime Minister which leave something to be desired. This is a serious and important decision, and we are all of us are in some state of darkness and going into a conflict to which we see no immediate end. Even President Obama talks about this being a long-term conflict.
James Bezan, we do have to ask the question, which has come up in the question period today, the second most asked question, and that was, what about humanitarian assistance? Are we providing enough humanitarian assistance? Are we providing, for example, have the monies flowed, have the resources flowed that we promised several months ago?
Yeah, we definitely are supporting in excess of $30 million, working with organizations on the ground, helping build those refugee camps and providing that humanitarian aid that's so important. We see this as being a two-step process, that you have to provide the humanitarian assistance and work with international organizations and through the UN to bring about that support and help. But at the same time, we also have the responsibility to go in and protect those groups and people that are being victimized, terrorized, raped, beheaded, and that requires a military action. And that's why we're over there already. We've authorized up to 69 Special Forces members to go in and advise both from a statistical tactical standpoint, as well as in helping with best practices in dealing with counterterrorism, and at the same time providing all the airlift capacity over there. We're using our Hercs and our C-17 Globemasters in providing over 580 tons, of military and humanitarian aid, and that is a significant contribution, and actually is one of the biggest contributions in this whole ordeal that we have partnered with over so many countries in Mr. Obama's ask of all of us as allies to be engaged in this.
Okay, one last question to you, representing the government, and it's just a one-word answer. The British were able to debate. They were able to put together a motion and debate that motion last Friday, a week ago. It was dispensed with in a day. The motion was clear, and it said that there would be no airstrikes in Syria. James Bezan, would you like to see that kind of caveat also on our action in the Middle East, that the airstrikes would not be against Syrian targets, but only Iraqi targets?
That I can't speculate on, but I can tell you I am hoping that we're going to see a very clear motion with parameters, and it would be very nice to see the same type of collaboration and support that came from all parties in the British Parliament, as well as seeing that same type of consensus coming from the Liberals and the NDP here in Canada.
Well, I think on that note, I think you could all three agree on that. It would be nice to see some clarity and some cooperation. Thank you, all three of you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Martin.